Some just count tanks. Others steal blueprints for nuclear bombs. The Cold War is the battleground for thousands of spies and spotters.
Both sides collected intelligence in order to avert what was considered to be a looming war.
The secret services have few scruples when it comes to procuring intelligence. They pay for acts of treason which may spell death for those exposed.
Do I have an awareness of blood guilt? No. No, I didn't.
They were spooks with a license to spy. The men of the Allied military liaison missions in Germany were at the forefront of the intelligence war between East and West. Yet even today, hardly anything is known about their feats.
No other Western intelligence service got as close to Soviet military equipment.
But where there are secrets, there's danger too.
We knew that Soviet sentries were trigger-happy. They tended to shoot first and ask questions later, if at all.
Kalashnikov stuck in my neck, okay, so you don't move, okay?
The risks were pretty enormous. In fact, how on earth I'm still alive, in fact, how on earth any of us are still alive, I have no idea.
They were friends, and I understand what it takes to lose a friend, a close friend, for this matter.
East Germany in the 1980s. It's the deployment zone for 20,000 tanks.
Another one, another one, another one.
Since an army's heavy equipment is usually transported by rail, military snoopers turn into train spotters. Their brief: to count tanks and to identify units. The men of the Western military missions like Lawrence G. Kelly, Nigel Dunkley, and Jean-Paul Staub often lie in wait for days on end. The military missions had been established to sort out problems between the occupying powers in post-war Germany. Their members enjoy the status of diplomatic couriers, yet they soon use their privileges to spy on their opponents. The Soviets are touring West Germany, while Americans, French, and Brits roam the territory of the German Democratic Republic in the east. Their main objectives: the other side's battle tanks. A rail track north of Magdeburg. As the memories come back, Kelly, Dunkley, and Staub decide to steer their veteran off-roader to the nearby town of Barleben. Once, this was a perfect spot for spies.
On some days, you could easily watch half a dozen trains going by, as an armored division was either leaving for an exercise or returning.
To Western snoopers, Barleben was a key location. From here, the rail track leads directly to Letzling Heath. Back then, this was the most important training area for Soviet units in Eastern Germany. Out of bounds for Western military missions. They could merely look on as the trains entered the restricted area, always under the eyes of the State Security or Stasi and the FOPO, the notorious People's Police.
Sometimes we only had perhaps 20 minutes or perhaps 30 minutes at the most before the FOPO would be along. And of course, it was like a cat and mouse game.
On most occasions, they get away. But not always. A propaganda video shot by the State Security in 1978. a team of American snoopers is caught in the act. A tarpaulin across the windshield blinds the driver. A Soviet jeep cuts off the retreat of the mission car. Its occupants surrender. The license plate of their car is recorded, and their spy tools are displayed for the camera. The missions are a nuisance for the East German government. Walter Ulbricht, the chairman of the State Council, accuses them of espionage.
Look here, this camera. It's 92 centimeters long. Not exactly an amateur device.
To Ulbricht, it's evident. The missions are reconnoitering targets for an offensive war. At least that is his interpretation of the maps they have seized.
This merely confirms that the representatives of the US mission were especially interested in the areas of their envisaged military thrust.
No state enjoys being spied upon. Yet in this case, there is no way to prevent it.
The rules were based on the joint jurisdiction for all Allied occupation zones in Germany. Therefore, Ulbricht had to accept that East Germany couldn't act as a sovereign state in these matters and had no legal authority to prohibit this kind of espionage.
In 1960, espionage is but one problem for the East German state. There is a virtual exodus of its citizens towards the West. The very existence of communist Germany is at stake. In 1961, its leaders decide to stop the bloodletting by erecting a wall. They don't care about the human suffering that will be caused by the partition of Germany. The Western powers accept the wall as unavoidable. In 1963, US President John F. Kennedy visits West Berlin. 9 months before, the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought both sides to the brink of a nuclear confrontation. But the most perilous days of the Cold War seemed to be over. Kennedy pledges to defend Europe's freedom with nuclear weapons if need be. East and West alike expand their strike potential. There is no defense against intercontinental missiles launched from silos or submarines. And if this were not enough, there are now several thousand tactical nuclear warheads deployed in both parts of Germany. Rod Saar, a Royal Air Force officer with the British military mission, lies hidden in the dark when a pair of headlights approach. It's a jeep. It stops. A Soviet soldier is checking the barbed wire. The slightest noise may give Saar away. Saar is waiting for Soviet fighter jets which are scheduled to appear in a few hours for practice attacks with live ammunition. He hopes to get some revealing photographs. Back then, in the early 70s, Saar has a reputation as a cool, calculating daredevil.
The challenge was really to get to these targets without being interfered with by the Stasi or the Soviets in particular, to be able to get in close. So those were the kind of challenges you faced. But experience was an issue, so it took time to gain confidence and understanding of the terrain.
Saar and his companion intend to hide directly beneath the jet's lane of approach. At daybreak, their cover must be perfect. Soviet firing ranges and bombing practice areas are prime locations for Western military snoopers. They are out to spot new types of planes and their armaments, and to assess their strike potential. A Stasi guard has detected unwelcome spectators from the West, an interference Tsar would rather avoid.
You would sit under the flight line because the Stasi would not come under the flight line. They didn't want to have bombs dropped on their heads, so they avoided that. So that was the kind of different strategy.
Rod Tsar, well camouflaged under the approach lane. To him, as an Air Force man, flight maneuvers are highly revealing. In 1971, he is watching an Su-17, NATO codename Fitter, when its pilot suddenly performs a steep climb. An unusual maneuver for dropping a bomb. What's behind it? Astonished, Tsar continues to observe the plane.
So the aircraft flew in at about 400 feet, low level, and then it goes into a steep climb up to sort of 2,000 to 3,000 feet, and then towards the top of the climb it releases the bomb, which actually then is thrown forward. It then, in fact, in the end rolls out and flies off at high speed. So it was simulating a tactical nuclear attack. And here actually is the simulated nuclear weapon underneath the aircraft. It was the first time that we had seen that, and it indicated the capability for tactical nuclear strike by the Soviets.
Even when the target practice is over, the range itself can be full of interesting finds. Parts of projectiles may indicate their caliber or the use of new metals. One day, Tsar comes across a bomb in the shrubs, a dud. Obviously, the propeller of the detonator had malfunctioned.
On the tour, I had 2 RAF corporals, and in a democratic sense, I said to these 2 guys, are you happy that we take this unexploded bomb, it was about this big, back to Berlin? And they said, yep, fine.
Yet, it's a long haul to Berlin. Will the bomb be stable enough to withstand 1.5 hours on the notoriously cobbled roads of East Germany? In the end, they make it back in one piece and present their prey to their superiors.
The brigadier suddenly was there, and he said, what have you got there, Rod? Because we had a tarpaulin. Unexploded bomb, sir. Oh, he said. So we went into the Air Force operations room. We laid it on a long table. We took the tarpaulin off, and all my colleagues went. So then the ordnance people came. They took the bomb away. I was then going on holiday. I said, okay, dismantle the bomb. I want to take photographs, which I did. When I came back, they told me, well, this bomb was unstable, and please don't bring back any more unexploded bombs. End of story. I wouldn't do it today, by the way.
Tsar doesn't think of himself as a spy. They were mere collectors of military intelligence, he says, with the occasional foray into diplomacy. As in April 1966, when a Soviet jet crashes into a lake in the British sector of West Berlin. It's a Yak-28, back then the most modern supersonic interceptor of the Soviet Air Force. To Western intelligence, it's an opportunity not to be missed. The Yak had taken off in Finofurt, near Eberswalde. At the local Air Force Museum, there is still one on display. Klaus-Peter Kobber has dug into the story behind the crash. It was the starting point of an ingenious intelligence operation.
The British began analysing the wreck straight away. The parts still visible above the surface told them exactly what they had before them. And, being experts, they realised immediately that they should salvage parts of the jet engine and, above all, retrieve the components of the airborne radar.
So, the Brits drag their feet. The RAF experts need time to lift the secrets of the Yak. The Soviets protest. The British military mission is called in to defuse the tension. As it gets dark, their stomachs are severely tested, but the Brits gain precious time for their technicians.
Well, I had to drink lots of East German brandy with the two Soviet Air Force colonels in their jeep. Yeah. And then they said, we must eat. And from underneath the seat, they pulled out this dirty cardboard box which had cold liver and garlic. And I had to eat and drink this dreadful stuff.
The stalling tactics pay off. Meanwhile, an elaborate effort has been launched to recover the Yak's vital components from the crash site.
The divers floated them underwater, the engines and the radar, for about 2 miles round, where they were taken out of the water and flown back to England for evaluation. Yeah. Having had them evaluated, they were flown back. Yeah. And the divers floated them back again, and one came up and said, "We've found the engines." Yeah. You know?
A whole week passes before the engines are returned. As for the airborne radar, the British claimed that they couldn't find it. The Soviets do not believe them. Moscow is said to have ordered the replacement of all modules of their friend-foe identification electronics, as well as all relevant codes, throughout their air force. It's an immense effort, yet unavoidable, since the Yak pilot didn't push the button that would have ignited an explosive cartridge. This would have destroyed the radar set and the coding block.
We asked the people at the factory who had developed those components what might have happened if the crew had survived the crash. They told us that they would probably have faced a court-martial, which might well have resulted in a death sentence.
Since the crew perished with their plane, they escape any legal consequences of their failure. They are even declared heroes. According to the official version, they had given their lives to prevent their jet crashing into a housing area. Boris Kapustin and Viktor Yanov are buried with full military honors. Up until then, the only thing that mattered had been to get hold of the Yak's secret equipment. The surroundings of Potsdam have always been considered prime locations, a fact that the military missions were well aware of. Images of the Villa Colonel, filmed in the 1980s, when it was the seat of the French military mission in East Germany.
La villa, pour nous,
to us, the villa was a corner of France, a place where you could feel comparatively safe.
Today it is used by the ambassador of Ecuador. The missions of the Western Allies worked closely together, and there were official receptions where everyone met. Like here, during a reception staged by the French to celebrate the 14th of July, their national holiday. Events like these are reserved for diplomatic small talk and celebrating peaceful relations.
It was interesting to observe the Soviets from up close. I was very impressed by how much they could drink.
Summer parties at the villa are considerably more relaxed affairs. There is a barbecue, and the members of the missions have brought their families along. Scenes of an easygoing life at the shores of a lake. No one would suspect that these men are savvy collectors of military intelligence who in no time could switch from diplomatic niceties to covert action hot on the trail of their enemy. Sigurd Weber and her brother Jens are retracing their personal history. The banks of the Elbe River near Magdeburg had been their childhood playground. And it was at this very spot that Sigurd Weber did coolly approach a Soviet soldier to sound him out about pontoon bridges. That's now almost half a century ago, when Sigurd was a so-called travel spy for the BND, West Germany's foreign intelligence service.
I knew exactly what information I was looking for. I said, Kuda, meaning where to. He looked at me and then he explained what they were doing. Stota, what this was all about. He was really quite naive. He just explained everything to me.
Bridge-laying trucks figure prominently in the BND's Handbook for Spies. Engineer units of the Soviet Army are a prime target for Western reconnaissance. How quickly they can cross a river is valuable strategic information. It helps to assess the potential rate of advance of the Warsaw Pact's armored forces. Sigurd Weber, her late husband, and her brother Jens were amateur spies. They were not in it for the money, but had chosen to do their bit to overcome a state which kept its citizens locked behind an iron curtain. In 1954, Sigurd Weber and her future husband left East Germany and settled in Hamburg. In the mid-60s, they were approached by the BND and asked whether they would reconnoiter military installations in the GDR when visiting their relatives back home in Magdeburg. Sigurd's brother has stayed behind in the East and is by now thoroughly frustrated. In 1971, his sister talks him into joining their tiny spy ring. Travel spies were the BND's go-to solution after the building of the wall.
Up until then, the BND had recruited stationary watchers. These were citizens of East Germany who lived close to barracks or training areas and would therefore have some insights into what was going on there. They would document their observations and relay them in secret letters, or sometimes directly to operatives of the BND.
The building of the wall puts an end to this practice. 1961 is a bad year for West German intelligence anyway. In November, Heinz Felfer, the head of the BND's counterintelligence department, is exposed as a KGB mole. It's a colossal embarrassment.
The damage was enormous, since the BND's counter-espionage was practically wiped out at a stroke. It took years to rebuild the counterintelligence department to something even approaching a reliable working order.
Felfer, who by 1945 was a lieutenant in the SS, ends up in the spy trade after his release from British captivity. He soon belongs to the inner circle around Reinhard Gehlen. World War II had barely ended when the former head of the Wehrmacht's Foreign Army's East Section offered his expertise to the Americans, who by now were keen to establish an anti-Soviet intelligence service in their zone of occupation. In December 1947, the so-called Gehlen organization sets up camp at Pullach near Munich, funded at first by the US Army and finally by the CIA. It's the nucleus of the later BND. Its recruits include former Wehrmacht officers, SS men, and even diehards of the Gestapo. It's an old boys network, and security checks are mostly dispensed with.
These people took their bread from anyone who would offer it. Their lives had been uprooted. Most of them were unable to build a career in the new post-war society. Those who had been professional soldiers had no future at all. There was no German army anymore, and according to the prevailing view, there should never be one again. So they took any offers that came their way.
Retracking Felfer's activities reveals treason on an alarming scale. The damage is far worse than initially suspected.
In their post-fact analysis, the CIA estimated that Felfer had blown the cover of about 100 of their agents,
as well as 94 German informers of the BND. In 1963, Felfer is sentenced to 14 years in prison. Barely 6 years later, during a spy swap, he is sent back to East Germany. Once there, he is resettled by his masters, becoming a highly respected professor of criminology. East German propaganda portrays him as a staunch activist for world peace and as someone who joined the right cause after an inner conversion.
I had to act the way I did. For me, it was about learning the lessons of the past. I had to join the side which, as was my conviction, could never be the cause of another war in Europe.
A self-justification with scant awareness or regrets for the agents he left exposed, and who the KGB may well have liquidated. To historians, Felfer remains a contradiction and an opportunist of the highest order.
Presumably, he just sold himself to the highest bidder. He was a classic turncoat. To him, status was immensely important, the recognition he got. So his motives were neither purely financial nor purely ideological.
A cynical master of deception and betrayal. A man who never queries the actions of his masters in Moscow, not even as Soviet tanks roll in to crush the Prague Spring. In August 1968, Moscow smashes any hopes of socialism with a human face in Czechoslovakia. Western intelligence services are caught by surprise. CIA memos had doubted Moscow's willingness to risk an invasion. Nearly 100 Czechs and Slovaks, as well as 50 soldiers, are killed. The message is clear. Moscow will tolerate neither reform nor opposition. An armored recovery vehicle of the East German Army, built on a chassis of a T-72. Time for some tank nostalgia on the grounds of former Soviet barracks near Magdeburg. An armored personnel carrier, the type Lawrence G. Kelly, Nigel Dunkley, and Jean-Paul Stowe, once spotted by the hundreds. In the middle of the 1980s, NATO could probably only have responded to an all-out offensive by Warsaw Pact forces with a nuclear counterstrike. The new T-80 was a formidable weapon, a prime target for military snoopers, and a most dangerous one.
Somebody had the clever idea that we should find out the chemical properties of the new armor on such vehicles as T-80. Simple. They just said, it's okay, just scrape the paint away and then take a diamond cutter. I still have one, I still have mine. Sorry about that, I still have mine. Take a diamond cutter and then scrape a sliver of the metal away from the front glasses plate of the tank, and then put it in a container and then take it home.
In theory, at least. Yet then, as now, fortune favors the bold. A British soldier on a Soviet tank. A photograph displaying secret technology with an apple showing its comparative size. A T-80 with a new kind of reactive armor. Small boxes containing explosives which were intended to blow up any oncoming projectiles before they impacted.
One of our exceptional tour NCOs, displaying a great deal of presence of mind and decisiveness, clambered onto the train, removed a small box of explosive reactive armor from a T-80, then quickly dismounted, re-entered the vehicle, and the tour sped off to West Berlin.
It's a significant coup in the arms race between East and West. 1970, a military parade in Magdeburg. Jens Lech and Sigurd Weber are on a mission from the BND, counting military equipment.
We'd been told to be on the lookout for missile vehicles. There weren't many to be seen, but we managed to spot some. They were all tracked vehicles with different configurations. We'd been trained to register if they were old or new, what type of tracks they had or how many axles.
Monitoring the strength of the other side's forces is Cold War routine. Yet, numbers alone won't do when assessing the potential enemy's capabilities. To get a clear picture of his combat readiness, it takes observers on the ground. The city of Magdeburg is of special interest for Western intelligence. It's the headquarters of the 3rd Soviet Army. For travel spies, a ride on Magdeburg's streetcars is one of the safer ways to get a glimpse into Soviet barracks.
That's line 6.
I told you.
It's still running. Line 6.
The line is still operating. The barracks have long since been demolished.
There was just a short stretch at the turning bay up there where you could look inside, but only if you were standing.
The Webers have been thoroughly trained for this kind of covert observation. They are not to take any notes. One of them will inconspicuously observe what's happening inside the barracks, while the other keeps watch for any security officers among the passengers. An ever-present risk back then.
The state security, Stasi for short, had planted a ring of unofficial informers around any military object. They would count, photograph or film whatever went on.
Anything that might be suspicious is recorded, even if it is only a car with a Western license plate. Taking photographs near military installations is strictly prohibited. Even passers-by are scrutinized. A mother with her buggy might be a spy, or a daughter taking a walk with her father while on a visit from the West.
This way, dozens of travel spies were caught in the act.
Sigurd Weber and her brother Jens are arrested in April 1978. Her husband didn't come along this time and is spared the ordeal. It has never been precisely established how their cover was blown. Sigurd Weber suspects a mole within the Federal Intelligence Service. Her brother presumes that the state security had cracked the address they had used to keep in secret contact with their controller at the BND.
The day we intended to leave, my car was damaged, so I drove to the police headquarters to get a complaint for my insurance company in Hamburg. When I was stopped on the way, I naturally thought it was because of the damage to my car. Some windows were broken, a side mirror had been ripped off, so I thought they had stopped me because of that. I had to leave my car and hand over my keys. I was coaxed into a Wartburg. The doors were locked at once. And there I was, sitting between two female constables. I refused to believe it at first. But then I thought, this is it.
Days of interrogation follow. There is no use denying the charges. The Stasi already has proof. For Sigurd Weber, it suddenly becomes clear. Her controller's assurances that they need not expect any trouble had been nothing more than words.
When my brother got 15 years, I said, well, that'll be life for me. But my interrogator said, no, we also chop off heads.
Sigurd is spared the worst. Yet even a life sentence comes as a shock. She is unaware of any agent swaps and must face the prospect of life in prison.
Everything was bad, but the isolation really hit me. Loneliness is terror. In retrospect, that was really the worst. There was no one to communicate with. I was always alone, in solitary confinement. And they knew that you can break a person's psyche like that.
She is released after 3 years, thanks to another spy swap. The following year, her brother is sent back to the West. The Webers were hunting for the tiniest parts of the overall puzzle, mere ants in the vast world of global espionage. But there are times when a single agent can undermine the security of a whole nation. The treason committed by John Anthony Walker is considered to be so devastating that, after his exposure, he spends the rest of his life in prison. He dies in 2014, in the 30th year of his confinement. Walker begins his career in the US Navy and is trained as a wireless operator. He is then posted to the headquarters of the Strategic Submarine Fleet. While he is only a tiny cog in the communication network of the world's most powerful navy, he now has access to the most sensitive information. He is working in the field of communication technology and cipher codes. In 1967, Petty Officer Walker begins to cash in on this highly confidential information.
To
him, it was a business. He was solely out for money, and there was no political or ideological motivation. He wanted money, and he knew that he could demand a high price.
Walker's approach is as direct as possible. He copies some secret documents, drives to Washington, D.C., walks into the Soviet embassy, and offers the KGB a deal. Money, in exchange for secret codes used by the US Navy to encipher their communication. To the Soviets, it's a goldmine. They will be able to trace exercises of US Navy units, analyze overall strategies, and collect data about weapons systems on board. From now on, the Soviets will be listening in. And what's more, Walker also enables Moscow to pry into the holy grail of the Americans' nuclear arsenal, the operations of their strategic submarines who are prowling the depths of the oceans along secret routes, ready to launch their nuclear missiles.
A submarine is a lone wolf, silently moving underwater without anyone knowing its whereabouts. That is its protection and, of course, also an essential element of nuclear deterrence. If this secrecy is compromised, that is, if an enemy penetrates the communication systems of your own submarine fleet, then all its movements would be disclosed, and the fleet itself would be next to useless.
Schleier weggezogen und die U-Boot-Flotte wäre nahezu nutzlos.
Walker escapes the radar of American counter-espionage for almost 2 decades. A man who sold the security of his nation solely for greed. When he is finally exposed, it's a revelation of nightmarish proportions.
What brought him down was a purely private matter. His ex-wife, they divorced in 1976, feared that he would entangle their adult children in his spy business. And so she rang the FBI. To her, it was bad enough that her husband was such a nasty piece of work, but as she said, at least I won't let my children go to the dogs.
Aber meine Kinder lasse ich hier nicht vor die Hunde gehen.
For her son Michael, however, it's too late. He's allowed himself to be lured into his father's activities and is sentenced to 15 years in prison. Vietnam, at the end of the 60s. The US Army is engaged in a war against the Communist North. In its effort to contain the spread of communism in East Asia, the US administration makes but poor use of its intelligence services. Memos on enemy strength and morale are often nothing more than wishful thinking, while reports tend to overestimate the effect of American firepower in the jungle. Even highly sophisticated spy jets like the SR-71 Blackbird do not bring about a decisive change, although their crews run the gauntlet almost daily to reconnoiter North Vietnamese air defense and to identify strategic targets. The enemy defies any effort to bomb them into submission. In the end, the superpower loses the war which had claimed almost 3 million lives and became overshadowed by atrocities and massacres. The outcome is a bitter pill for an administration which had misused their intelligence services to supply its leaders with the information they wanted to hear. It's a busy day in the air above Welzow, south of Cottbus. That's why Rod Saar is there, along with his team. It's early September 1972, but the Brits aren't alone.
Corporal Calvin said, there's somebody in there in this low pine. We're in low pine trees. Said, fine, everybody in the car locked, equipment away, I would investigate.
Saar suspects them to be operatives of the Stasi, East Germany's state security forces. Usually the missions don't really care about them. They may call in the Soviets, but that would merely be a nuisance.
My tactic with the Stasi was always to chase them aggressively. So if I knew the Stasi were hiding, I would run at them. And I'd run, I'd charge, and I'd shout. Standard aggressive tactic. And this worked. They would run, they would go.
But this time, the men in the bushes aren't Stasi. They are Soviet special forces.
They changed their tactic. They used, each airfield in the end had Spetsnaz platoons, so special forces platoons, and they would try and jump you. And their aim basically was to be violent.
The Spetsnaz, or Spetsnaz, are among the toughest troops on either side. Elite units trained not to back down. At first, they merely observe the British as they move about near the airbase. Then, Rod Saar tries his usual tactic on them.
They rose up, I ran back, too late. I got me, Kalashnikov stuck in my neck, okay, so you don't move, okay. Got to the car, smashed the car window, knocked out Corporal Calvin, didn't touch the group captain, but stole our equipment.
Rod Saar is declared persona non grata by the Soviets. It's the end of his forays into East Germany. He has pushed his luck too far this time. A powerful engine is a trump card on the Allied missions tours. Superior speed helps to shake off any shadowers or, if need be, to make a getaway, be it on the road or on rough terrain. By stepping on the gas, you could leave the state security standing in the dust. Burkhard Mielke was among those who often came out on the losing end of such encounters. During the 1980s, he works for East Germany's Directorate for Counterintelligence.
At times, they were speeding along at up to 220 kilometers per hour. With our Wartburgs and Ladas, we didn't stand a chance.
The specially modified mission cars have a range of 1,000 kilometers, whereas a Wartburg would have to refuel twice to cover that distance. Stasi photographs of a mission tour filling up, showing the size of the additional tank. Cool and composed, these Allied mission officers channel the nonchalant spirit of the easy riders. Protected by their status and horsepower, while their eastern shadowers record their activities on film.
Later on, we gave up chasing after them and set up reception committees instead.
The missions must now reckon with Stasi units lying in wait along their tour. Their opponents know from experience where and when the Western snoopers will most probably show up.
Every directorate was trying to impress the ministry. We said, today is the big day. We'll capture a mission car, get hold of their equipment, and teach them a lesson. Every unit wanted to be the first to achieve this, and so we came up with a few ideas of our own.
It had been decided that state security should no longer simply record the mission's activities, but actually prevent them. Unbeknownst to the men on the tours, the rules of the game had been changed. The driver's cab of a truck still arouses painful memories for Jean-Paul Staub. To this day, it reminds him of an incident overshadowing his years as a tour officer for the French military mission. (1984), north of the city of Halle. 3 days before, a Ural, a heavy truck of the East German Army, took up position in a side road. It is apparently waiting for the order to move.
Maintain your position. Everything according to plan.
Roger.
At about 11 o'clock on March 22nd, the Stasi prepares to strike. Its target, a car of the French military mission on its way to observe a major exercise of the Warsaw Pact forces in East Germany. Jean-Paul Staub is riding in the back.
We did notice an army jeep coming up from behind. It seemed like he was intending to chase us. But we were in front, so we sped up a bit, and under normal circumstances, we would have got away.
But it's a trap. Suddenly, there's a truck ahead of them. It's the Ural. And it's behaving in a most threatening manner.
I said to Warrant Officer Mariotti, who was our driver, "Stop, we won't get past him." But I may not have been forceful enough. Anyway, in critical situations, it's the driver who knows best which decision to take.
C'est le conducteur qui est celui qui peut le mieux prendre les décisions.
Both drivers step on the gas. The soldier in the Ural is determined to block the French car, come what may. The result is a fatal crash. Stills from the accident filed by state security.
Et je dois dire, il aurait presque réussi.
The truth is, Mariotti nearly made it. 1 or 2 seconds earlier, and we would have got past the truck and sped off towards Halle.
Il n'y est pas parvenu.
But sadly, it wasn't to be. Mariotti died on the spot.
Moi, j'ai été très gravement blessé.
I was severely injured, and our third man, Warrant Officer Blancheton, had a broken shoulder.
L'adjudant Blancheton a été blessé grièvement. Il a eu l'épaule cassée.
The strike against the French had been elaborately planned. No less than 3 trucks had been positioned ahead of the French vehicle with a view to catching them red-handed in their illicit activities.
I'm no lawyer, yet to me the term negligent homicide seems applicable here. They obviously knew someone might get killed, yet they went ahead regardless. After all, the cars involved weren't little Trabants made of plastic, but heavy trucks.
Philippe Mariotti acted on his driver's instinct, as he had done many times before. For once, he misjudged the situation. The French government tries to keep the incident out of the headlines. Both sides are pursuing a policy of military de-escalation. The death of a soldier must not get in the way of international diplomacy.
Et il a été enterré,
he was buried discreetly, without military honors. An ignominious end to the life of a soldier.
Pour un soldat.
The garden of the former French military mission in Potsdam. In remembrance of Warrant Officer Mariotti, a memorial stone has been laid. His comrades leave their wreaths at the site of his death. An act that, too, is duly recorded by state security cameramen.